Yo, what's up? Dr. Swole here, MD, pro physique athlete. Today I'm going to be giving you the 10 worst mistakes that beginners make when they start lifting. I remember being in the beginner position years ago and not really knowing what to do for optimal hypertrophy. There was a lot of conflicting advice from people online. And I could see that a lot of bodybuilding influencers didn't really know the science behind what they were talking about. Today we'll be talking about the biggest mistakes that beginners make when they start lifting in terms of training, diet, and nutrition, and how to solve those mistakes. First beginner mistake that people make in the gym is not having a consistent workout plan. You'll often hear people say that they go in the gym and wing it, or they're very inconsistent with their workouts and only get to the gym once in a while. You can't build muscle this way. You really need to have that consistency to build progress over time. The first element of this will be actually having a workout program to follow. As you guys know, I'm the king of free hypertrophy programming on YouTube, so you'll find lots of free templates on my channel. Find one that fits into your schedule and meets your volume requirements. That is, you're able to recover from the amount of sets in the program. In terms of how much you need to be in the gym, I recommend training about 3 to 4 days per week as a beginner. You don't really need more than that because beginners will respond to very small amounts of volume and still build muscle. Plus, I would rather that you start on the conservative side with how much commitment you're making to the gym. This way, you're more able to stick to the plan and actually get to the point where you're able to see results. So if you think you can train 4 days a week, I'd probably just start with 3. Make sure you're able to be rock solid consistent with that and then add more. Beginner hypertrophy mistake number 2, you're not training hard enough. When I talk about proximity to failure, I usually use RIR, or repetitions in reserve. This is how many more reps you have left in the tank before you can't complete any more with good form. The truth is, a lot of people just aren't training close enough to failure. It always grinds my gears when I see someone talking on the phone or even texting during a set. According to the current scientific opinion, you want to be at least within about 4 reps shy of failure to start getting into a good zone for hypertrophy. As a beginner, I personally recommend starting off training to within about 1 to 2 RIR. This will make sure that you're getting into a high enough intensity, and getting pretty close to failure is more reliable. As a beginner, it's difficult to reliably judge 4 RIR. If you think you may have 4 reps in the tank, you probably have a lot more. And there was a study showing that beginners are very bad at judging how close they are to failure. If you're training with low volumes and you like going to failure, it is reasonable to have some failure work in your training. I personally take the last set of the last exercise for a muscle group for that workout to failure. Having some regular failure training in your program will make sure that you know how close you are to failure during the rest of your sets. Next mistake that beginners make in the gym is that they're not progressively overloading. After sustainability and consistency, progressive overload is the most important factor for hypertrophy. That is, you really want to be getting stronger over time. My rule for progressive overload is that you want to progress as quickly as possible in a sustainable manner. There are different schemes you can use for progression over time. As a beginner, I'd recommend starting with single and double progression. Single progression is where you increase one variable in a linear fashion. The most common example is just adding weight over time. As a true novice, you might be able to add weight to your big lifts every workout. And if you're able to do so, I would recommend that because that's going to be the fastest rate of progression. As you become more advanced though, you won't be able to add weight as quickly and you'll have to slow down that pace of overload. They say that a beginner is able to add weight every workout, an intermediate would be able to add weight every week, and an advanced athlete might add weight every month or slower. Double progression is where you change 2 variables over time. So for example, starting with 6 reps of 100 pounds, then the next time you try for 7 reps with 100 pounds and continue adding reps until you get to 10 reps with 100 pounds, then you come back down to 6 reps and add weight going up to 105 pounds. Note that this is a slower rate of progress than single progression is, but it's one that I really like and it's a staple in bodybuilding. Next mistake that beginners make is getting their training volume wrong. And this could mean you're doing too little or too much. Most people probably fall in the camp that they're doing too little. Now, as an absolute novice just starting out, you could probably even build muscle just doing 1 hard set in the gym for each muscle group per week. And if you're just starting out, I would recommend starting low and just adding sets as you're able to. But as you progress from the novice to intermediate stage, you're probably going to need more volume than when you started. Here's a graph of rate of progress to number of sets, or your training volume. And rate of progress is how quickly you're actually building muscle. Notice that the relationship of volume to rate of progress is an inverted U-shaped curve. This means that if you're not doing enough volume, you may not progress or you might even go backwards. At some point, there's going to be an optimal amount of volume for you. And if you keep adding sets to that, your rate of progress is not going to be as good. And eventually you might even pass the point where you're doing too much and you might not be able to recover. Something I wanted to point out here is that this curve will actually shift depending on your level of experience. This is something that you have to find out for yourself, and it will change for each muscle group. So don't make the mistake of just following a cookie cutter program out of the box. You will need to make modifications to any program to suit yourself. And this includes any of the free templates you see on my channel. You will want to take one of those, start and see how it goes, but then make modifications over time for optimal progress. Next mistake that beginners make in the gym is having inefficient exercises in their programming. You've probably seen that person who comes into the gym and only does isolation work for their arms, or they think they're going to build muscle from some kind of yoga pose. You really want to be focusing on your heavy compound basics as a beginner. So this means hitting movements in your 6 main categories. Squat type movements would include squats, front squats, and leg presses. Hip hinges would include deadlifts, RDLs, hip thrusts. Horizontal presses, so bench press variations, vertical presses or overhead pressing, horizontal pulling, so all types of rows, and vertical pulling, so chin-ups and lat pull-downs. And obviously there are lots of examples within those categories. But you really want to build your program around these because they give you the most bang for your buck in terms of the amount of muscle that's stimulated. For example, doing chin-ups hits your back and your biceps. So you're basically getting a 2-for-1 with this exercise. Plus, movements in these categories tend to do well with progressive overload. That is, you want to choose exercises that allow you to add weight over time. This is one of the reasons why people love barbell variations so much, because they allow you to very precisely add weight, and they have a huge potential for the total amount of weight that you're able to add over time. Plus, learning these basic movement patterns will carry over to your later training. The next issue I see novices have when they start off in the gym is poor lifting technique. You probably see this all the time in the gym, the dog trying to take a poop deadlift, or just excessive cheating. For example, if you cheat on your reps too much, you might be getting the weight from A to B, but you might be swinging with so much momentum that you're actually not getting a lot of tension on the muscle itself. Cheating on reps is also less reproducible. So often people, instead of progressively overload, will just progressively cheat. That is, their technique just gets worse and worse as they add weight, and they're not actually getting stronger. Having a consistent technique with your lifts will actually make sure that you're getting stronger when you do add weight. Now, in terms of learning technique, you can watch lots of videos on YouTube online. All the exercises in my programs can be easily searched up on YouTube. And if you have access to a friend with more experience or a coach, I would recommend getting some help with your big barbell compounds. So learning how to squat, bench, deadlift, and row properly. An analogy to having bad exercise technique is like laying down railroad tracks in the wrong direction. It doesn't matter how hard you're working or how fast your train is going, you still aren't going to get to your destination. So make sure you tighten up your technique early. This will pay huge dividends in the long run. Next mistake that people make has to do with diet, and this is not getting into a deficit for fat loss. Losing fat is a big goal for a lot of people. And in order to lose weight, you need to get into a calorie deficit. Most people have no idea of the caloric content of the food they're eating. If you are trying to lose fat, I would recommend getting into a deficit. I'd recommend aiming for somewhere between 0.5 to 1.5% of your body weight lost per week. Note that if you're a beginner and you want to achieve body recomposition, that is build muscle and lose fat at the same time, this is possible in a deficit. In fact, most beginners will still build muscle while they're in a deficit and losing fat, as long as you're training properly. So a lot of people will come to me and say that they want to recomp, but they're not sure where they should set their calories. As a beginner, I do recommend just getting into a deficit if you have fat to lose. I think this way you'll see results faster. In terms of getting started with calories, it's really important for you to understand your own caloric intake, find your own maintenance calories, and actually get an understanding of the caloric intake of the food you're eating. Start off with having a food diary. So for a few days, log everything you eat, and then figure out how many calories and macros are in that food. You can do this using an app like MyFitnessPal, or you can just Google all the ingredients of your foods. Then I would recommend systematically removing some calories from your diet until you start losing weight. The easiest way to do this is to just swap higher calorie density foods for lower calorie density foods. For example, cutting out unnecessary fats and sugars, and then replacing some of your carb portion with vegetables. So for example, if you took a cup of rice and replaced it with a cup of broccoli, you would have fewer calories in that meal, but you would still be able to feel full from those vegetables that you're adding. Next mistake beginners make when it comes to hypertrophy is bulking too quickly. You will see people talk about how they've gained 5 pounds of muscle in a month or 40 pounds of muscle in a year, and this sounds great, and often they actually do look a lot bigger, but most of it is fat. When you're bulking, you're almost always going to add some proportion of fat to the amount of muscle that you're adding. And the thing is, your body's only able to add muscle at a maximum rate. Beyond that rate, the additional weight you gain is just going to be fat. So say that your body is able to realistically put on 5 pounds of muscle across a year. If you gain 10 pounds that year, you would add 5 pounds of fat. And if you gain 20 pounds that year, you would gain 15 pounds of fat. So if you're trying to put on mass, I do recommend lean bulking. That is, trying to gain weight at the slowest rate that still allows you to maximize muscle growth. For beginners or people in their first 1 to 2 years of serious training, I recommend lean bulking at a rate of about 1 to 1.5% of your body weight gained per month. Beginners are able to build muscle at a faster rate, so this recommendation is a little bit more aggressive than what I would advise for an intermediate to advanced athlete. As an example, if you weighed 200 pounds, gaining 1% of your body weight per month would be gaining 2 pounds per month. And dividing that by 4 would mean 0.5 pounds per week. Next mistake that people make is that they don't get in enough protein. Protein is the most important macronutrient for muscle building, and often I'll see people having meals with no protein source, or they'll overestimate the amount of protein in the sources that they're actually using. For example, peanut butter doesn't actually have as much protein as people think. I recommend that you start off with 0.7 to 1.0 grams of protein per pound of body weight per day. You'll see that this is actually a pretty conservative recommendation. So for example, if you weighed 170 pounds, getting in 170 grams of protein would be plenty. Again, knowledge is key here, so start looking up the macro content of the food that you're eating and try to include some protein source in each of your meals. Also, get good at eyeballing protein sources. As a rule of thumb, a piece of chicken breast the size of a deck of cards or about the palm of your hand is going to give you about 30 grams of protein. And this will apply to other lean meats as well. I would also recommend trying to spread out your protein over 4 to 6 meals per day for optimal hypertrophy. Bodybuilding mistake number 10 that beginners make is not prioritizing recovery. Recovery is hugely underrated in bodybuilding. I have never seen good gains for myself when I'm not sleeping enough. And yes, sleep is probably the major component of recovery that you want to be focusing on. The way I think of it is, during training, you apply your stimulus and do damage to your muscle. And when you rest and sleep, that's actually when you recover and actually build muscle. I'd recommend getting a minimum of 7 to 8 hours of sleep per night. And the other component of this is sleeping consistently. Having a consistent sleep schedule will help with the quality of your sleep. Now that we've gone through these 10 bodybuilding mistakes, what are some mistakes that you see beginners making when they just start off lifting? Let me know in the comments below. If you want to see where things go beyond the beginner level, check out this video where I give you a full blueprint to hypertrophy from beginner, intermediate to advanced. These are all tips that I wish that I had when I started out.